my entire so. And then I found myself in a position that I needed a sponsor, and I knew that there was nobody else that I could ask that I trusted but him. He's a book guy. I've heard him speak a couple times, a few times. He's got a great story, and we are lucky to have him here and get to hear his story today. So, welcome, Sean, please.
I'm Sean, an alcoholic. Congratulations on 10 years. Big deal. In 90 days. To Ray's cousin. Congratulations, and especially to you, young lady. 24 hours. It's a big deal. Everyone in this room starts their time with a 24 hours. So I'm glad that you're here. Um, I've been sober since August 14th, 2006. And I see a lot of friends in this room, so I'm gonna do my best to get my good behavior. I used to I used to get really anxious and think for days about what I was going to share at these type of events, and that turns out for me that doesn't go so well. So I don't do that anymore. So we'll see how this one goes. I was thinking a little bit about it this morning, and I think sometimes I like to think that how I feel about alcohol now is was always the case, and that's not true. I loved alcohol for a long, long time. I remember the first time I got drunk, I was 13 years old, and I'm one of those guys that didn't know how much they needed it until I tried it for the first time. I remember that when I first got drunk, I just felt like, wow, I, I, I don't know how I lived for 13 years on this planet without this substance in my body. I mean, I was born and raised in this town. I had a normal childhood. I don't have anything I can think back to complain about. In fact, I was pretty lucky. My childhood was an adventure. There was a lot of drinking in my family. Um, generations, cousins. My mother's is in this program. So there's lots of alcohol in my family, but I had a normal childhood, but I was sort of anxious, sort of. I was a super anxious and maladjusted kid, and I didn't really know that. But I remember the first time I got drunk, I just felt at ease sitting around this campfire, and I was just like, oh my gosh, what a miracle! Like I just could not believe how good that felt. And then I thought about that nonstop. When's the next time I can do that? I remember that right from the beginning. Right from the beginning, I never drank like a normal person. I was always as soon as that happened, my grades were no longer important, sports no longer important, nothing. It was how am I going to get to the weekend and scratch together some money and find a spot to go drink beers with my friends. And back in that time around here, we'd go up into the woods, up the Rattlesnake or up Hattie Canyon or up Deer Creek, something like that. We'd get a truckload of pallets and some milk crates to sit on. We'd start a fire and put on some Motley Crue, and we'd sit up all night. And I remember I was like, if I could stay here forever, I would. I don't need a family. I don't need a job. Turns out I need a pile of pallets and some milk crates and some some hair metal music, and I'll stay here forever. So I love drinking. I love it for a long time, and I started getting in trouble right away. But I've always looked at it like this: that's the cost of doing business when you drink like I drink. It didn't bother me. If I have to get arrested every once in a while, get beat up once in a while, get fired once in a while, get kicked out of school a couple times, break a couple bones. I breeze right through that stuff. That's the cost of business when you have to drink like I had to drink. Um, and I did that for a long time. And then that trouble started to escalate. And then we started having the police in this town were kind of following me around. They were following me around, waiting for me to miss a turn signal or something like that. They knew they had a warrant on me. They started taking me to jail, and I wasn't happy with that. And I did what us alcoholics do, and I decided I was going to pull a geographic, and I moved to Seattle, which was a big mistake. Um, no one in Seattle gave a much care who I was, and that trouble didn't stop, but the consequences were worse. I was now finding myself in the King County Jail, and they're not like the police are around here at the time. I'd pay $100 and have a friend come pick me up. I'd be back in Stockman's before last call around here, but in Seattle, I was on the ninth floor of the King County Jail, and that kept happening over and over. I'd be there for 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, getting fired, getting evicted. all that kind of stuff. I started trying to control my drinking. That also didn't go so well. I would do things like, all right, if I'm drinking beers and shots, which I always was drinking beers and shots, I'd have a couple glasses of water after every third, let's say, beer and shot. Or I'd be like, no drinking from Tuesday to Thursday. That's how I would try to control it. Like a couple days during the middle of the week to, impress the bosses or whatever. And so that stuff didn't start to work. But I tried to control it for a long time. Um, and and it didn't work. And then I found myself, one many of you know me, have heard the story. I found myself in this really bad hotel on Aurora Avenue in Seattle. I'd been kicked out of another apartment. My family was no longer talking to me, nor were most of my friends. I had 4 DUIs stacked up behind me. I had a couple of arrest warrants. And I was going to this hotel. I shared this just the other night with home group, and it just cracks me up. And I remember I I would I would pay cash every night like it was my last night. I'd be like, I'm checking out of this shithole I've had with you people. I've got a big bright life ahead of me. And I did that every night for 2 months. Be back in there like, oh no, I'm moving my stardom to tomorrow. Um so, so I'm holed up in this hotel and I was having seizures. I wasn't eating and I was just waking up and going to get drunk to make it all kind of go away. What had stopped working for me in terms of alcohol is for a long time, alcohol allowed me to escape into this fantasy place where I was going to get out of this thing. I'd sit in my car or in a bar stool. My life is in shambles, but when I drink, I could just envision this life that was going to start tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow. That was great. And it was such that fantasy was so real. Drinking helped me make that fantasy so real that for a while it was a sufficient substitute for reality. I felt good enough in the lie when I had that fantasy that all of the trouble to get drunk where that fantasy could start would go away. I could make up for it. And that stopped working. Uh, my last drink was nothing special for me. I had gone out to my bar in Ballard, Washington, and drank. And I heard whispers of these people. I didn't even know these people. They said that they were going to have an after party after the bars closed. They hadn't had enough drinking either. And those are the type of people I like. If you got plans after 2 o'clock, I'm your best friend. And so we got a bunch of beer. We went to this complete stranger's house. And eventually they all started getting tired. Now it's like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I wouldn't leave their house. They were like, we gotta work or whatever. And I was like, yeah, we're good. They eventually went to bed. They left a complete stranger sitting in their living room, drunk. And they all went to bed and walked down the backyard. And I was relieving myself in the stranger's backyard at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that was a tough time for me. The birds were chirping and garbage trucks were moving around. And it was probably a Tuesday. And normal people were getting about their day to go to work. And I was in the same clothes I was in the day before. I'd smoked 40 cigarettes, drank 20 beers, done some other stuff I probably shouldn't have been doing. Then I'm standing in a stranger's backyard in the sunlight, going to the bathroom, and I had a warm Bud Light in my hand. And I remember looking, I just was like, it occurred to me, and I was like, for the first time, I was like, I'm doomed. I'm doomed. This isn't going to work. I'm not going to get out of this. And I didn't know what to do. And I think about that word because that's how it felt. The book talks about that. It talks about being doomed to an alcoholic death. And I think that word's interesting because usually when I hear about it, they talk about people getting on the doomed journey of the Titanic or those people that died on Donner Pass that do their dune voyage, that type of stuff. There's fate implied with that word that these people know. They don't know that they're goners, but they're going about their business and fate has something in store for them that they don't yet know. And I like that. That's how I felt that morning. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was like, if I continue to do what I'm doing, if I'm standing in a stranger's yard tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, peeing in a stranger's yard while everyone else is going about their day, I'm a dead man. I knew it. But I didn't know what to do. Then, so I made my way back to that hotel and I was seeing things. I was hearing things. I was throwing up this awful black liquid that doesn't belong in a human body. And I was shivering. And I picked up the phone and I called my mother, who was 7 years sober at the time. And she had probably 6 months before that told me she didn't want to hear from me anymore. unless I was willing to discuss my drinking, which was terrifying for her. But she had enabled me long enough where she knew that if I continue to participate in this, I'm going to participate in the killing of my own son. And I remember when I called her, I could tell by how she answered the phone that she wasn't sure it was me on the other end. I think she thought some policeman was going to find my phone in a ditch next to my dead body or something like that. She answered the phone and she wasn't talking to her son. She heard my voice and that's the first time she said, "Sean, what's the matter?" And I said, "I'm an alcoholic and I want to quit drinking and I need some help." It was that simple. I haven't had a drink since that day. It was my last sip of beer, was that warm beer in that guy's backyard. It's terrible. I wish it was something different. Champagne on it. It's the worst. And she said, "Are you sober enough to drive?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." She said, "Can you sober up to drive back to Missoula, or do you need to get on a plane?" I said, "Well, lucky I got this fancy hotel up on Aurora Avenue, and I paid him $60 last night so I could stay there until 4 o'clock today." So I went back to that hotel and I slept, or tried to sleep. Drove back to Missoula. 7 days later, I was at Rimrock in Billings. I'd never been. I'd never stopped drinking. I didn't know anything about AA. I had intentionally avoided it my whole life. People would talk to me about it. If you try to talk to me about stopping drinking, I punish you for even bringing it up. So I knew nothing about AA. I had this thought because I'd gone to 4 ACT classes with the 4 DUIs, right? So I thought AA was going to be a scholastic endeavor. I was going to learn. Someone's going to get up there and they're going to say, if you weigh 180 pounds and you have 2.5 glasses of red wine, but all of that kind of stuff. And someone was going to teach me that a guy with my configurations and statistics shouldn't drink anymore. That's what I thought AA was. And so I wasn't very excited about that. That sounds awful. And they took me to my first AA meeting, which is 510 Cook in Billings. Some of you have probably been there. And I remember they took us there early, and I felt like a spectator, but I loved it. The people were in good moods. I remember a lot of vet type guys, a lot of vests and beards, and they were happy and they were giving each other coins, just like I saw at the beginning of this meeting. And they knew one another. "Hey, how you been? Haven't seen you in a couple weeks." And it looked like a bar, the activity, but no one was drunk. And I was like, wow, man, I really enjoyed it. I did 36 days, I think, in rehab, and I came back here, and I had to stay 5 more months in Missoula before I could go back to Washington to clean up some legal matters that had accrued. And I started going to the Sunrise meeting every morning and the Missoula group every night. And I did that for 5 months. And there's some people in this room that were at those meetings. My friend Sue was at probably the first AA meeting that I came to in Missoula. My friend Mike, Frank, Kathy, Greg. I remember you guys from that first 5 months when I was going every night. I started reading the book, listening to the book. I got it on tape, and I'd drive around the mountains smoking cigarettes, listening to Alcoholics Anonymous. I liked the book a lot at the time. Still do. But I wasn't working with a sponsor. I think I told myself, I got to go back to Seattle in 5 months. I'll deal with that when I'm out there, right? I don't want to settle in and share all my secrets about all of the bad stuff I've done with a guy and then have to go do it again. So I stayed sober, went to Seattle, and then I did the same thing. I'm like, I'm only here for a year to clean up this legal stuff. There's no point in starting out here. Well, I'll wait till I get back to Missoula. So I did that. I came back here, and then I was like, eventually I moved to San Francisco for a year and a half for a job. So I did the same thing. I'm leaving for San So I ended up for a period of time without going through the book with a sponsor and doing the steps. Way longer than I should have. Don't recommend that for any people. But I love the book. I love AA. And I like meetings, and I like being sober. I did that for a while, and I came back here, and I started to think about drinking. This is after 5, 6 years sober. I wasn't happy with my life. I thought that the rewards of sobriety hadn't caught up to me fast enough. I remember early on, I thought I'm going to quit drinking. By the end of this month, I'll have a 750 credit score. By the end of summer, I'll have all this court stuff cleared up. In fact, they'll probably ask me to go to law school for the community. I'll own a house. I'll have and that, and it wasn't like that, man. It took a long time. So I remember I started feeling sorry for myself. I didn't get close to drinking, but I started saying like, I remember catch myself saying stuff like, well, if this is all surprise, like at least when I drank, I had fun. I would be that guy. And I started complaining in AA meetings about it. And uh, people started off gentle and it got sort of escalated from there. They'd say, hey, are you working with a sponsor? And I'm like, no, all that kind of stuff. That eventually turned into people pulling me aside after meetings and saying, listen, you need to do something here. Or maybe you shouldn't come back every night. You know what I mean? They were sick of it. And I get it. I was sober in AA. I wasn't carrying the message. And the message I'm supposed to be carrying is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, not the message of Sean's shitty life. That's what I was taught. And so people started, I could tell they were getting tired of my mouth. I was too, but it was therapeutic for me. So then I went up to this man who I could tell was a book guy. His name was Frank. Most many of you know him. And I didn't have the courage to just ask what I wanted, so I lied to him. First thing I did was lie to this guy. Said, hey, I need to talk to you for a second. Said, I know you don't know a lot about this book. I said, listen, I get these guys coming up and ask me about the steps all the time. Can I come talk to you about it and just get some opinions from you? No one had asked me anything, by the way. And he said, he looked at me with a smile and he said, why don't you come to my apartment at 5 o'clock on Wednesday and I'll answer any questions that you got. I was like, yeah, I'll check my schedule and I'll see you then. I showed up at his house. He opened the door with a smile on his face. And right when I walked in, I was like, oh, there's a weight set in the living room, which is amazing. And then there's a card table in this little kitchen with two chairs, a big book, a 12 and 12, a dictionary, a service manual, highlighter pens, magnifying glass, red pencils, yellow pen. Oh, I was just like, oh shit. He goes, take a seat. And sat down and he knew I needed help. And he ended up being my sponsor for a long time and he took me through the book and took me through the steps. From that first meeting, I felt some relief. I was like, wow, this could change for me. I trusted this guy. And so at the end of that first meeting, I was like, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I think I can handle all these guys that are coming to me now. And he said, I'll see you next Wednesday at 5 o'clock and bring a big book. And that was it. Then we spent over a year going through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We stopped all the time and talked about it. Sometimes we would get 2 sentences in one of our sessions, and it sparked such a conversation that we would spend the whole hour and a half at the beginning talking about those 2 sentences. We get nowhere. So it took us over a year to get through that book. And everything changed for me. you taught me the story of Roland Hazard, going to meet with Carl Jung to try to get sober. And Roland Hazard bringing that message back to Ebby Thatcher, who I love because Ebby was about to go to jail for being drunk and blowing off a shotgun in his front yard. That's my kind of guy. And Ebby Thatcher cut a deal with it. I'm sorry, Roland Hazard cut a deal with the judge to instead of Ebby Thatcher going to jail, that he'd take him to the Oxford group and try to sober him up. He figured I can do better than jail can do with this guy. And then Ebby Thatcher is in New York and he ends up talking to Bill Wilson. And my sponsor taught me that although he was helping Bill Wilson, Ebby made that call to help himself. Ebby was thinking about drinking, and Ebby knew that if he could find another alcoholic to work with, that it was going to help Ebby not to take that drink. And that sponsor taught me that I'm connected to that story. That's the beginning of it. It's the genesis of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're in this room, you are also connected to that story. That's what I believe. And it's a powerful story. Kept going. We started doing the steps. We got to that part of the book where it talks about the guy who liked what he'd heard in AA, but he was a doctor, and by God, he wasn't going to go around town telling all the people how he'd wronged them. He wouldn't do it, and he couldn't get sober. And one day he'd had enough, and he went around, and they say he grabbed the bull by the horns, and he drove around that town telling all of the people in his community that he'd wronged them and asked what he could do to make it right. And he never drank again. And that's the founding day of AA. That's Founders Day. And that was Dr. Bob. I love those stories of those drunks in New England back in the 20s and 30s, I was like, that's when I realized that I am part of a class of people that is distinctly different from other people. My sister's not part of this story because she doesn't drink like I do. I am part of this story because I do. And I fell in love with that story. And we did the steps, and we did them as they came up in the book. We prayed with that guy. I did a 4th step with that guy, 5th step, the whole deal. I remember we started getting to amends, and I was like, opt out of this part on some of these. And he was tough on me in a loving way. He shared this with me, which has been helpful. He said, you don't have to do this. There's all sorts of ways people try to get sober. This is one of them. And you don't have to do it. If you don't want to come back here next week, you don't have to. You can go to Schick Shadle and do what that is, or you can go try this. You can go get a psychiatrist, whatever you want. But if you're going to do AA, this is what we're going to do. So you either come back next Wednesday at 5 o'clock with your plan to make an amends to this person, or don't come back. And what he did there was he put the responsibility on me. You decide what you're going to do here. Are you willing to do what it takes to get sober or not? And I remember thinking, I might not do that. I don't like the way he made me. He's not my father. But by the time that next Wednesday rolled around, I was scared of what was going to happen to me if I did not do that. Right. And so I did. And I made my amends and all that kind of stuff. And something happened. You got through the steps. And by that time, I was going to meetings early and meeting guys. Some of them are in this room. And what I lied about earlier, remember all those guys I said were asking me about the steps and to help them that hadn't happened? Without me saying anything, I didn't wear a t-shirt that said I've been through the steps with a sponsor. All of a sudden, men started asking me for help because I'd learned from that man. And that was reflected. He also taught me how to behave in AA. And believe me, sometimes I fail at that. But my conduct in Alcoholics Anonymous changed because that guy got me to fall in love with this program and respect this program and the traditions that we have here. And men started asking me to sponsor them. One of the first guys who asked me, sitting right there. I've been sponsoring him since. And I learned what I always like to say is I found the secret. It's not a secret. It's on every page of that book that helping other people is the secret of AA. My sponsor made me count. And before you even get to chapter 1, if you start at the prefaces and you go through all those, it talks about working with others about 41 times before you even get to chapter 1 of that book. And my sponsor pointed that type of stuff out for me. And so I started doing that. I started sponsoring other men in this program, and I had an experience. I didn't know that in Alcoholics Anonymous something was going to happen to me. Like I said, I thought I was going to learn something, or I thought I was going to get old enough for getting drunk didn't seem like a good idea anymore, or something like that. I didn't know that I was going to have an experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did. I had an experience in this program in doing those steps. And another thing, I remember that same sponsor one time, he goes, "What is AA?" And I recited what we already did. I said, "Hey, I read it. I hear it every night. It's a fellowship of men and women, blah, blah, blah." He said, "It's not." Because that's the fellowship. But how about this definition? And he opened up the 12 and 12 to the preface here where it says, AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which it practices a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink, and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. What an amazing promise that is, right? But there's some assumptions in there, right? That doesn't say anything about going to meetings. And I'd spent a long time thinking, if I don't drink and I come to AA meetings, I put a buck in the basket and drink some coffee and have a couple cookies, and maybe go fly fishing with you guys once in a while, that I'm going to be happily and usefully whole. But that sponsor pointed out that that's not it at all. You might find some people in that fellowship of men and women that are doing this program. You'll also find plenty who are not, and you need to choose which one you're going to be. And so I started looking at this program differently, and I started doing step work, and I still do. And the obsession to drink has been lifted from me for some time. And once you know, some of the promises started coming true. I was famous for bitching about the promises, and some of you have already heard this, but it's like, well, you should really think about complaining about promises when you haven't done the work that those promises require you to do. I was again famous for that kind of stuff. But I did the steps. I started doing some service work. I go like this with that because I get mad at you all pretty easily sometimes. You know, I'm not doing this for a while. I need some time off. And I don't recommend that either. But it's the truth. And I remember I was speaking one time when I was younger in sobriety, and I got up here and I was thinking about the person with 24 hours. And I started saying, like, you need to come into AA, you need to sit down, you need to start cleaning coffee cups, you need to get a sponsor, you need to start, and I said all this stuff, and then after that meeting, my sponsor goes, we need to talk. And he goes, I get up there, and he goes, none of that's your story. And he was right. That's not what I did when I came in here. I wish that I did. I wish that I did, but it wasn't. And so I started sharing my story after that. And that wasn't intentional. I was doing what the other guys helped me get sober say. The truth is I drank 15 Mountain Dews a day and I smoked 25 cigarettes. I wore sweatpants for a year. I couldn't hold down a job. I was like a giant infant roaming the Northwest, and I was hanging on by the skin of my teeth. That's my story. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't drink, and I went to meetings. And I think I stuck around here long enough to realize that sticking around isn't going to cut it for a guy like me. That if I kept doing that and I kept behaving the way that I've always behaved as a drunk, but I didn't have the alcohol to make those guilt and shame kind of go away, that eventually drinking is going to sound like a good idea, because that's how I solved all of that stuff before. And so I remember what ended up being true is what I was hoping wasn't at the beginning, but now I'm grateful that it was, that for a guy like me to stay sober, it requires me to change some behavior. That wasn't the bargain that I signed up for at rehab, man. But now I'm grateful for it because I feel I feel safe sober, right? And I can voluntarily confront the next challenges in my life, knowing that I'm going to have a clear head doing it, and that I don't have to look over my shoulder all the time. Every room I walk into, I did it this morning. The first thing I did was get my back to the wall and face the door. That's the way I live my life. And I used to have to do that because there was a good chance someone was going to come through that door that I was going to have to run from or fight, or they were going to put me in some iron bracelets and take me out of there. But I used to spend my life, I felt like hound dogs were chasing me. When I still see movies like that, Cool Hand Luke, that's how I felt for years. Like, wake up ahead of those hound dogs and get running so no one catches you. And now I don't feel that way anymore. I still have dust ups all the time. I'm trying to think, I might have had one today. Maybe not, but I have them all the time, but they're sober and they don't last. And if I fall off the beam that this program tells me I need to be on, I know where to come and I know what to do. And I've seen some amazing things. I was sponsoring one guy one time, and we had done the same thing. We'd gone through the book for a year. So I knew him well. I know him well. And I expected there was some part of his story that I hadn't heard that was critical to him getting sober, right? I didn't know, but I suspected after getting to know him for all this time. And he was at my house doing a fifth step. And I remember praying for him that he had the courage, whatever it was that I could tell was lingering inside this man, that he got it out at this opportunity. And he sat down and he started doing that step. He said he was done, and I did what my sponsor did, and I asked him if he was sure. I didn't push him. And he got up, walked to my door, and he had his hand on his door, and he stopped. And I remember it was really tense. And he just was holding that doorknob, and he looked up like this. I was looking at his back, and he turned around and he sat back down and he said, I got something else. I remember just being, I'm so glad that he did that. And he told me in the parlance of AA, it wasn't any big deal. You know what I mean? I'd heard it before, but it was a big deal to him, I tell you. He hadn't told anyone that. And then a year later, I was meeting him for sponsorship. At the time, we met at the 4Bs over that crosses Rattlesnake Creek. We're sitting in a booth there eating French fries and drinking coffee. And this place was packed. And sitting there. And by this time, he'd started sponsoring other men in this program. And he's talking to me about it. That's what we do in sponsorship. Sometimes I'll ask my sponsor, hey, I got this guy, he's got this thing. What's your experience with that? So he starts telling me in front of this whole restaurant full of people, and he's screaming. He starts repeating this thing. He's like, so then I'm telling him, and he's repeating a story that he had never told anyone and that he almost didn't tell me. And I'm like, dude, we're in 4Bs, man. Like, tone it down. And these people are not alcoholics. So shut the fuck up. He's like, but and I realized that because the book talks about this, so I was witnessing it in real time, and this is why sponsorship for me is so important because I didn't see it in myself. This book talks about turning. And this book talks about alchemy. It talks about turning our flaws into assets, our greatest assets. And that's what that story was led on that young man's heart. And having shared it with me and gone through the steps, and he's now sharing with another man, he had turned it into gold. That's what alchemy is. And here he was. He was not burdened by that story at all. Not only was he not burdened by it, he was using that story to help. And he was telling me how ridiculous it was that this other guy was worried about it. And I was like, there's the beauty of sponsoring other people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never forgot that. And I have tons of experiences like that where I see in you what I don't so easily see in myself. I see men and women come into this program at the end of the line, right? Out of jail, divorced, fired, two their arms in two casts, all of that kind of stuff. And I see lives change, and I've seen my own life change, but sometimes it's easier for me to see it in other people. That's why I think this fellowship is so important. Um, when I when I came here, I thought I've got a pretty good crew, like in my normal life. I'm just not going to drink. I'll come to AA and get what I need, but I'm just still stay plugged into my big time Missoula Mac life around here. And I don't need to be a part of this fellowship type thing. I'll take what I can get in terms of the program and be on my way. And now it's been coming up on 20 years, and all of my friends, so for members of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's amazing. Um, and my life has taken on a new direction and new meaning. And I know that all can be pointed back to that man's backyard and feeling doomed if I were to drink again, and picking up the phone call or picking up the phone for the very first time, asking someone for help and identifying that I'm an alcoholic. For me, there was something to that, to saying it. I could tell right when I did it. I don't know if that's for you, but voicing it out into the world, I think that's why we do it in meetings. It makes it more real than if we don't. At least that's how it felt for me. So I think about people that are new. I've got a guy who is not sober, and he's come to me a few times hinting, asking about this program. And that's happened to me a lot over the years. I've sort of gotten used to identifying it. People start asking me weird questions. I'll get some emails or DMs on Facebook, and they'll start like kind of asking questions about being sober. And I'm usually like, okay, and I don't say anything. I just answer their questions. And sometimes 2, 3 years later, they finally drop the bat, act like it's a surprise. Like, I wanted to tell you this all those years ago, but I got a drink of probably some else. I was like, yeah, I was on it. Yes. I've got another one of those right now, and I've known him for a long time. And I'm waiting for him to tell me to say those words that he's an alcoholic and ask for help. Um, Another good thing about coming to meetings, well, it's a good thing, it's a lesson, is you get to know these people and you see how few of us make it through this thing, right? Those friends that I pointed out that are in this room, they're at my first meeting. There used to be 50 of those. And if you've been around here long enough, you've seen that you've seen people that your friends die of alcoholism in this program. And it's sad. I started noticing something consistent about the people that were around sober for a while. And they told the same story with some variations, but the story was just the story that I just told you. Usually, I came in, I didn't do a lot right away. I wasn't drinking, I had a hard time. Maybe I slipped a few times. Then eventually, I got some foundation under me, and another person in this program helped me, and everything changed. That's sort of the story that I hear of the people that have been sober for a long time in AA. And so I think it's important to share that with people that are new. I found everything I needed to get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I found a program that was written down for us to take and make our own. I found other people that were eager to participate in that program. I found a place where I could be of service to other people in my life. And if you're like me, um, that's not my natural state. I didn't do anything for anyone unless I was paid for it or there was something I was getting out of it. And I don't remember that being a conscious decision. It's just the way that I was. I thought about it. I was like, I don't do a lot for other people. And that's one of the things I think is beautiful about AA too. If you don't have that, it gives it to you. It's right there. It gives it to you for free. Um, and that's the magic of this program for me. If I had to, if for some reason I had to move anywhere, let's say my job moved and I had to move to Houston tomorrow, it'd be like, all right, pack the stuff, deal with the cat, get down there, find a place to sleep that night. But the very next thing I would do was get a meeting list and I would find meetings of AA and I would start going to them. And I'd try to pick one or two or three that felt like good AA meetings to me. And as soon as I could, I would put myself in a position where I could be of help to another man. I would start shaking hands. I would start sharing so people could hear what I had to say, and maybe someone would identify with it. And in a month, or maybe 2 months, or maybe a year, some young man in Houston is going to walk up to me and say, "Hey, man, I've been listening to you for a while. Would you be interested in sponsoring me?" It's the first thing I would do was set that in motion. And if you would ask me that 20 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. The first thing I would have done 2 years ago, I would have found the type of bar I wanted, get an apartment close to that. You know what I mean? A whole different set of circumstances. It's the first thing I would do is just try to figure out a way to help another man get sober in this program. That's how valuable it's been to me. So if you're new-ish in this program, I hope you heard something that you can identify with. I loved drinking. Unfortunately for me, I'm in a class different than other people. I have a disease of my physical body and my brain that makes me not like people that don't have alcoholism. I believe that with every fiber of my being. Now I can see people like I had someone started at my company and I could be wrong, but in 10 seconds, I was like, this person's an alcoholic. You know what I mean? Like I was like, and what I was seeing in them was myself. You know what I mean? And I'm like that. I can see that. Or sometimes I'll be in a meeting and I'll see someone come in there. I was like, oh, this is my kind of drinker. And like sometimes I have to be careful because I'll kind of smile and I'm not making fun of them. I'm like, this is the type of thing. You know what I mean? Like this guy's a mess, and I'm just like. But one of the reasons I'm so excited about it is I'm like, if they sit down, and that's when we say it in here, we say, I hope I see you tomorrow. I love it when I see someone come in there, they don't know what to do, and they're yelling and they're mad at the room and they cannot stand all of us sober people. Then they come back, you know. I was in my home group, a similar situation in that first 5 months. Greg, you were probably at this meeting. I know Mike was at this meeting, and my home group had been being mean to my friend. They told him that he had to change what he was talking about or he wasn't welcome to that meeting. And I was brand new sober 2 months. And I was like, no one talks to my friend like that. I'd known this guy for 5 seconds. But he was also new. But I don't like top-down authority. I don't like people telling me what to do. And don't tell my friend what to do either, the guy I know for 5 seconds. And the people that were sort of setting it up, I didn't like them either. Mike was one of them. He's now one of my best friends. I was like, who's this Rowan guys here every night with the Vietnam clothes and the stories and the mustaches? These guys, they don't know anything about me. And they were telling this guy to clean up his act and he wouldn't do it. And they voted him out of that meeting. They said he was getting in the way of that meeting, being able to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. And I remember I went down there and this is so ridiculous. I'm going to say I got time. So embarrassing. So I was like, I'm going to blow this. I'm going to light a bomb off of this place, metaphorically speaking. So I had my big Starbucks with a whipped cream and all this shit. I go there early. I sit down. I'm just waiting. I'm like, I'm blowing this thing wide open. So they say they're gonna kick this guy out, and this was just so contrived. I was like, I made this big scene. You sons of bitch, and super dramatic. I could tend to be dramatic for effect. And at the meeting at the time was across from the police station. It's in the basement. The chair sat at a table, and right behind the chair was a door to go up the stairs to get out. And you could hear a cricket walk up and down those stairs. So I'm walking out and I made this big scene and I threw my frappa, whatever the hell that thing was, in the garbage. It exploded like a hand grenade. I opened that door And I said, I'm never gonna miss something. And I slammed the door and I started hoofing it up the stairs. And I heard someone, I have some suspects, someone goes, keep coming back, it works. And the whole room, the whole room started laughing. The whole room. I remember I was like, never coming to this place again. And I just was like, I was so mad. I left. But guess what happened? I woke up that next day at 8 o'clock in the morning. I went to my sunrise group. And then that day started carrying on. It started getting close to 8 p.m. I started getting real nervous because at 8 p.m., I'm at Stockman's Bar or I'm at the Old Peculiar Ballard, somewhere like that. I'm already 10 deep at 8 p.m. I remember thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do tonight to not have a drink? And I was afraid. And I crawled with my tail between my legs back to that meeting. And I didn't have to. You know what happened when I walked in that door? Those guys were thrilled. Hey, man, we're glad you're here. Take a seat. And I've seen that happen. I've talked to guys that go back out there and they're afraid to come back in. And I tell them, I said, don't be. You don't have to be. We love seeing people come back into this program. We love it. We see it all the time. At least I do. I went back down there and those guys told me to sit down and think about trying something different. And that's what I've done. I like my life now. My life feels like it has purpose. I work in an insurance company. I'm not married. I don't have kids. If you can find purpose in your life at an insurance company, hats off to you. AA, but that's fine. I do good. I like my job. I work there. I like the people there. I get to pay my bills and it allows me to do stuff in my free time that I like. But I have purpose in this program. You know what I'm saying? I get to help other men get sober and I get to see other men and women doing the same. Um, it's I love Alcoholics Anonymous, even though a lot of the problems that I had in my life are with people within Alcoholics Anonymous in the past 20 years. I have dust ups a lot, but it's okay. I haven't thought about having a drink in a long time. And it was killing me how much I was thinking about having drinks, right? So if we're doing this program and you're drinking 16 Mountain Dews a day and smoking cigarettes like a chimney and wearing sweats for 2 years, I love you. Keep coming back and maybe you'll feel like me one day and feel like I'm ready to do something different. This isn't going to work. And I hope you have the same experience that I had, which is open arms and love, tolerance, and help from other people that had found a way to get sober, tracing all the way back to Ebby Thatcher, sitting in Bill Wilson's kitchen, sharing the message with him, right? I feel like I feel we're all part of that story. And I don't know of another story, another social movement that's like that. It's just a wonderful thing. So I appreciate you all being here. I want to thank Stan for asking me. There's probably no better way I can think of to spend a Sunday morning than doing this. So I appreciate you. And again, congratulations to the three of you collecting coins this morning. I really appreciate when people share that with us. It means a lot. All right, that's all I got. Thank you. Yeah.